Get to do it again. Here we are, World War II. This is Hitler's parade car. Captured by Americans in 1945, it came to Canada a few years later. 1939, Canadians and other Commonwealth countries headed to England. Battle of the Atlantic, Canada played a crucial role in keeping the Allied shipping lanes open. Despite, Jill evidently said, the only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. And the U-boats performed poorly underwater, submerging mainly to hide from the enemy, but they were fast and effective on the surface where their low hulls made them nearly invisible. These are all sites of ships that were sunk by the German U-boats. Canadian troops fought Canada's first land battle of World War II at Hong Kong. About 2,000 troops were sent there to reinforce the British colony. 2,100 were killed and missing in action, including 290 Canadians, and there were hundreds of wounded. At the end of World War II, Canada had the third largest navy in the world, with more than 470 warships. In 1942, the Canadians forcibly removed Japanese Canadians from the coastal areas of British Columbia, just like Americans did along the coastal areas. As in the United States, the war required rationing. Raided deep. August 19, 1942 was the bloodiest day in Canadian military history. A force of almost 5,000 Canadian troops were overcome by the German defenders. This is an anti-aircraft gun. I learned that it's hard to hit a moving airplane, so they had these in groups and then just shot up into the air hoping to hit something. This was Germany's most produced, fully tracked armored fighting vehicle during World War II. Because of their low silhouette, since they didn't have a turret on top, they were easy to camouflage and be hidden, and were difficult targets to destroy. This picture shows how small they were. And then we have the Allied invasion of Sicily. It was a major campaign in July and August of 1943, and the Allies took Sicily from the Axis powers. Allied land forces were from the American, British, and Canadian armies. The Canadians served under British General Montgomery. The nearly 150,000 Allied troops who landed in Normandy on D-Day or parachuted into the invasion area, 14,000 were Canadians. The Canadians assaulted a beachfront codenamed Juno, while the Canadian paratroopers landed just east of the assault beaches. Royal Canadian Navy contributed 110 ships and 10,000 sailors in support of the D-Day landings. The Le Breton Gallery is a massive display area for large objects. Artifacts on display include artillery, aircraft, armored and non-armored vehicles, and naval weapons. In the final months of the Second World War, Canadian forces liberated the Netherlands from Nazi occupation from September 1944 to April 1945. More than 7,600 Canadian soldiers, sailors, and airmen died fighting in the Netherlands. Today, Canada is fondly remembered by the Dutch for ending their oppression under the Nazis. Japanese treatment of POWs was among the most inhumane of the Second World War. In 1941, after the Battle of Hong Kong, 1,682 Canadians were imprisoned at camps in Hong Kong and Japan. The POWs endured years of beatings, hard labor, and inadequate diets. Hundreds of Canadians died from illnesses due to vitamin deficiency or from slow starvation. In the Arctic, Canada is expanding the size and capabilities of the Canadian Rangers, who are drawn primarily from Indigenous communities. That provides a military presence in Canada's eyes and ears in remote parts of Canada. A new Canadian Force Arctic Training Center is also being established. Canadian forces were involved in the 1950 to 1953 Korean War and its aftermath. 26,000 Canadians participated on the side of the United Nations, and Canada sent 8 destroyers. Canadian aircraft provided transport, supply, and logistics. After the war, Canadian troops remained for 3 years as military observers. Canada is one of the founding members of NATO. Canada had nuclear weapons from 1963 to 1984, but they got rid of them. During the 1956 Suez Canal crisis, Canada provided troops to the UN and took part in the first major UN peacekeeping mission. I didn't know the UN still has peacekeepers in Cyprus, but Canada's involvement there is the longest running peacekeeping mission in which Canada has participated. They've been there since 1964 to prevent a recurrence of fighting between the Greek and Turkish Cypriots on that island. In 1991, Canada joined an international military coalition to confront Iraq following its invasion of Kuwait. It was the first time that Canada sent women to war in combat roles. From 1993 to 1995, Canada was a leading contributor to a series of UN peacekeeping missions in Rwanda. However, they were powerless to prevent the slaughter of 800,000 Rwandans in 1994. Following the genocide, Canadian troops returned, tasked with restoring order and bringing aid to the devastated population. By this time, we really needed a late lunch, and the museum's cafe was closed, but an employee suggested the Mill Street Brew Pub, which was on our way back to the hotel anyway. It's in a 177-year-old building, which was a former grist mill, and it's rich in industrial heritage and charm. The food was good and filling, and we skipped dinner. I had a tourtière, which consisted of elk, veal, pork, buttery pastry, and a demi-glace sauce. Stu had a burger.